In the 1980s, there was a man that was known as the Hammer Murderer in Denver, Colorado, who would uh, look for unlocked doors, houses that were open and occupied, go in, kill the household members uh, with a hammer. And he did this 5 or 6 times in the Denver area, which of course was well documented and was televised back when television was more of a thing in the 80s. And gun sales took a huge spike during that time. Now, the question is, of those thousands and thousands of additional guns, as well as the guns that were previously glutting the area, as they always have in the United States, the question is, how many of those guns were able to be used on this individual? And the answer is zero. Zero were able to be used on him. Zero were even pointed at him. And the man was not caught, and the city continued to live in fear. Then all of a sudden the murders stopped. But, and here's the important point, those thousands and thousands of guns didn't go away. Once a gun is purchased, it stays in that house basically until the individual dies and the house falls down. Being rid of a gun is an effort, takes a specific effort to make it go away. And guns never rot. They never. They are very simple machines made to kill. Well, the pistols are made to kill people, and those are the kinds that are usually kept around the house for household protection. But the question is, what happened to those guns? Well, as I say, they stayed in the household. So if they were used, how were they used? We know from the CDC that if a gun is used to do violence to a person, almost 2/3 of the time that use will be suicide. And the majority of the remainder of its use will be family members killing family members, acquaintances killing acquaintances, arguments, siblings killing other siblings, or parents to children, or children to parents. It's people that people know that they actually become so incensed with that they use the guns when they do, which is a minority of the time. When they do, they are killing other people, either on purpose, which is horrible, or by accident. I didn't know when you came into the house. I didn't know who it was. I thought it was someone breaking into the house. There are many situations like this. I have a friend at work, wonderful, wonderful guy, salt of the earth. And he kept a gun around his house for protection. And one night he got drunk, and he apparently someone called the police because of the commotion at his house. I don't know just how it happened, but the police showed up. The guy was drunk, and he went into the house because he didn't like the way the police were behaving. He grabbed his gun, he came out and waved it around, and oh goodness, and of course the police dropped him then and there. They're not going to wait for him to take a shot. So, and that was the end of that man's life. A wonderful guy, always had a smile for me when I saw him. It's just heartbreaking. The John Wayne said that the people who need guns are the people who own guns. Guns tend to breed the violence that they're purchased to prevent. Now, but about all those guns that were purchased for protection from that man, there is no word in the English language bad enough for that person. Monster is far too charitable. Depraved, evil, far too good words. But all of a sudden, those murders stopped. And so the guns were kept. The murders stopped. So what happened? Well, the man went to another state, was found, arrested, indicted, convicted, sentenced, and imprisoned in another state. And all those guns that were purchased were completely useless insofar as the purpose they were intended for, protection against this particular person and what he was doing. So all those years people were saying, well, I have this gun, and the man was sitting in prison for the entire time. They not only did not have the opportunity to use that firearm against this particular threat, that particular threat was non-existent. And once again, the number, statistically, the possibility of a man in his household using his gun to protect his family from an unknown intruder who's coming into his house is a statistical non-event. Now, as I said, the crimes did stop. And what happened then? Well, the person sat in prison, and genetic testing and genetic profiling became more and more advanced. And since he was sitting in prison, in the end, after several years, they were able to connect all those Denver murders to this individual who had been sitting in prison the entire time, which of course extended his prison term much longer than it otherwise would have been. And that's something to take into account if you're thinking of doing anything. I know my genetics are up with, one of those companies that does your genetic testing. And now what they do is they don't have to have your genetic information, since they probably have your relatives' genetic information. So now, whether or not they find you, they know who your parents and siblings are, and it greatly reduces the amount of work that police officers have to do once they have genetic information on the individuals. And more anyone who is convicted, their genetic information is also harvested and put into the data bank, so that it's very difficult. Something, again, just a side note, that's for free. Burglary of the type we think of, put on the mask, put on the hood, and climb in a window, and that is much less prevalent than it used to be. One, I don't know when's the last time I carried around cash or had any cash around my house. Drive merchants crazy. All I ever use is the debit card. And so if you're going to break into a house, you're probably not going to find cash the way you used to. Remember when they used to come in and steal the stereo or the television? Well, stereos and televisions are 1/7 the price. Remember we used to get a Pioneer receiver, then a JVC turntable, then beautiful huge speakers that cost thousands and thousands, and you'd get each individual part. Then you'd get this tape player that was just tremendously expensive with wonderful reproduction. People don't do that anymore. You get wonderful reproduction for a couple of $100. And if a person steals it, where's he gonna fence it to actually get the amount of money they like to get? Do burglaries still happen? Absolutely. They still do, but they're far less prevalent. So not only is it is it a statistical non-event for you to be waiting at the window to blow the guy away when he's crawling in? There's far fewer guys crawling in, and they'd have to be tremendously stupid to crawl into a house that is occupied without doing their homework. My point is, and continues to be, that civil authority is delegated to do the kind of work. My neighbor, oh goodness, someone was stealing the catalytic converter out of my car. One night I was sound asleep. The policeman knocked on the door and let me know what was up. And my neighbor found out what was going on. He thought it was me. He came over intending to help me, and for his pains got a punch in the nose. Well, now my neighbor didn't waste any time. Now he has a gun in his house and on his person, and I have no problem with that. Buy all the guns you want. But think what his life would have been if he had had that pistol when he had gone to that person and he had killed the people. I don't know. There would have been a lot of explaining. As Ricky used to say, you got a lot of splaining to do. And I don't know whether his life is better or worse. Because the guy who was stealing the catalytic converter punched him, which the police had a really very good idea of who it was, and so hopefully his life became very difficult, because anybody who assaults a person who's coming to be of assistance and assaults them without provocation. But my point is his life better or worse? Would his life have been better if he had had a gun and he had killed the person who was coming up to punch him in the nose? I don't know. Thankfully, I don't know. And hopefully I never will.